Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Well, hello, and welcome back to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and today we're going to jump into part 2 of the love affair and the heartbreak. This is a story of my life's relationship with cannabis and the people involved and the community and all of it, the medicine. Where we left off last time, well, actually, if you want to know the story, I would highly recommend go back to the first episode. This is part 2. So when I left off, I had recently discovered that the elixir that I made using cannabis extract as a tincture with food-grade alcohol was therapeutic for a woman who had cancer. And I realized at that point, I'm in a journey of natural medicine. I'm growing all kinds of healing plants and collecting a library of herbal books and, starting to gain a little bit of knowledge. And at the time, I was coming to learn that truth wasn't just one thing. And I wish I would have really held on to that, because I became a little one-sided or short-sighted in my thinking. When you discover something works really well, sometimes you want it to be more than it is. And when I discovered what cannabis could do, even in the least amount, it was aligned with what I liked, right? So I liked the plant, I liked the way it made me feel, I liked to grow it, I liked to smoke it, everything about it, I liked it. And so if I could have it be a good thing instead of a bad thing, wow, that was just the perfect storm. And so, but as I'm reading herbal books and I'm different authors, different experiences, different regions, I come to find out that not everybody agrees. And that started making my research difficult. At first, I just read a book and I made recipes and I tested on my own, which I continue to do because I always wanted to find out for myself, what it was like. And I would always test on myself to see if it was, toxic or whatever. But the more and more I realized, like, if I had 8 books and I looked up a use of an herb and I could get 5 of them to agree, then I would say, well, that's got some merit. Let me explore it further. If I was split 4 and 4, I don't know, sometimes I'd spend my time on it. If it was better than 5, which occasionally you found, I felt very confident. And with a limited amount of information about cannabis as medicine, I think I found a couple of books. There's little references. Always the herbal books would, call it marijuana spelled funny and whatever. And there'd be uses, and especially if you get into like spiritual uses and witchy uses and things like that. Well, there was generally some more to work with, but just as straight medicine, you'd find bits and pieces. Well, now we're moving forward and we're starting to make this company. My wife's developing formulas. We're starting to make skincare and this kind of stuff, and she really liked hemp seed oil, and so she started making a line of products that had hemp seed oil in it, and that was the whole thing. And meanwhile, I got less focused on making medicine and more on just, raising a family and taking care of business and whatnot. Got into real estate finance and got away from really health entirely. I got on these steroids to clear my lungs out, and it worked, even though I was already, didn't want to do that stuff anymore, but it was getting so bad I had to do something. And I started gaining all this weight and working a high-stress job and all this stuff. Well, the market crashes, reset everything, and I find myself with a partner opening up a medical marijuana dispensary. So this is fast forwarding to 2006. So in the time that I began extracting until 2006, a lot had happened. I'd grown a lot of pot. I'd made a lot of my elixirs. I was doing different things, but really wasn't working too much on the medical side of things. But we passed this law, and that started to bring a lot more information to light about cannabis as medicine. And of course, that made me more happier and happier. And, a lot of it was symptom relief. A lot of it was, nausea and sleep and all that. But that's good. That's health. And I realized as I opened up this collective that I really wanted to focus on the healing side of things. And I realized that this was an important point and an important plant, it was going to be a big chapter in my life. And working with these people and spending one-on-one time and learning more about different elements of cannabis and things that it could do, and sharing and showing people how it could help them, instead of just, hey man, what's the strongest you got? It's like, well, what's wrong with you? What are you here for? And getting people to think about the issues that they might have, even if they didn't necessarily come in for that. And I came to realize that this was a very medicinal plant, and it helped so many people in so many ways. And we did a really good job at what we did. And, at the time there was no standardizing. Nobody was making oil. And, backtrack a little bit, I realized, when I was making these elixirs, I always pushed the ticket. If I could make something strong, I said, well, let's see if I can make it stronger. So I would double, triple, quadruple extract these things. I would extract them until I couldn't get anything more out of it. And what I realized is that after a while, you'd start seeing this little black oil sort of float out of the tincture. And that's when I knew it was saturated. And, around the lid of the jar, around the rim, or as you were using the jar, it would start to stick alongside the glass. And I would scrape that off and taste it, and then we'd start rolling it on our joints, and I realized I had something good here. And that was really before there was Rick Simpson oil or any of this. I mean, there was people using Soxhlet extractors, and there was technology. People knew how to make oil, honey oil they called it, and soon after that, some BHO, they called it earwax, would come out, and people started figuring out how to extract. But this was 10 years before that, and nobody knew what it was for. I remember at the dispensary we would get edibles, and they would call them 1X, 2X, 5X, 10X, and it didn't mean shit. And I knew it then. And then testing started coming out, and I knew that was in a lot of ways full of shit as well. And I now know that as well. But statistics are what you want to make of them, and you can look through any lens you want and see what you want to see. But at least it gave us an indication of some things that were and some things that weren't. And we started discovering other cannabinoids. We started figuring out CBD and different, the whole decarboxylation side of things, THCA and all of that. And it really took me to a place where I saw there's really something here. And I remember there was one guy that made hash brownies, and he was the closest thing to standardization. He made pretty good hash, and it was pretty consistent, and he used to sell it to the dispensary or the collective. And I would use him kind of as the gold standard, because everybody else's edibles varied wildly, and one day they were real strong, one day they weren't, and you just never knew what you were going to get. And I started realizing that if you could count on something, then you could start to treat it as medicine instead of, well, it's going to help you. Now, we knew even then that there's no LD50, and there's no there's no lethal dose of cannabis. You can't kill yourself because you don't have receptors in your brainstem that would cause you to stop breathing, or your heart to stop beating or your organs to stop functioning. So it can't actually kill you like opium or cocaine or some of these other drugs can, which really gave it a sound position and sort of began to create my life as an advocate. And at the time we were operating the collective, I remember this woman, her name was Cha, and she came over, and she was from a group called ASA, and we signed up. She says, well, we're here to support you if anything goes wrong, and we're Americans for Safe Access, and we believe in this and that. So I was like, sounds cool. We made a donation, sort of signed up as members. Little did I realize, same thing with Normal. We got signed up with them, and I thought, oh, they're going to be there to help me. And well, we come to find out things later on. Now, we'll cover this in another chapter, but this is still the love affair part of it all. And at this time, our collective is starting to get a good following. People realized that if you wanted not only good quality medicine, but you could talk to somebody who knew some things, they would come here. And what we discovered is that our clientele was older than many. Our average client age was, I think, 40 or something like that. We had some kids come in, and we had the things that the opponents accused us of were true, but they weren't the only thing that was true. Just like everything, yeah, there was people that totally abused it and just wanted to get some pot, and they got it. Well, so what? That's what the law allowed. The truth is, if it helped you medically, which it would no matter what, even if it just helped you get a little stress, well, how many people are taking pharmaceutical drugs that just do that? And I learned pretty quickly that people could learn to look at their pharmaceutical cocktail that everybody seemed to be on. And I especially with concentrates, when we started getting them, taking hash or, these edibles, mostly we didn't have oils yet, but, you had hash and edibles, different kinds of hash. And it was concentrated enough and standardized enough that you could get a therapeutic dose and not just only be smoking away. And at one point, we even had an oncologist that was recommending patients to us. And I thought that was the coolest thing. That gave us the most legitimacy, because this doctor, I can still remember these patients would come in, they're being treated for cancer, and he's recommending the use of cannabis to assist them with their recovery from chemotherapy, radiation, and whatnot. And I was really kind of blown away that they would come in with a recommendation on a prescription pad, and I would call the doctor up and say, hey, I'm here at this medical marijuana dispensary. We verified everybody, and this client comes in with a prescription and recommended use of cannabis. Is this your patient? Yeah, absolutely. They would confirm. And I really knew that at this time we were on the right track. I'm really believing strong in this, and I'm starting to really, the relationship with this plant was getting deeper and deeper, and I'm believing that, wow, what can't this thing do? What can't this plant do? It seems to help everybody in every way. And it was so rewarding. I can remember a couple of times, not just a couple of times, there's a bunch of times, there would be, an 80-year-old man with cancer or some other disease, and he would bring in his kids and even sometimes his grandkids, and we would say, well, if they're under 18, they got to sit outside, but, we would go outside with them and talk. And, these were people that would never use cannabis recreationally. They didn't give a damn about cannabis recreationally. They just knew that this could help them. And then I would see, they would I would give them a recommendation. Usually it was some kind of an edible, take a little piece of a cookie and just try it. And it was always the recommendation to titrate, try a little bit, see how you feel. And if you can do a little bit, try a little more until you find the dose that works for you. And that was always our recommendation. We're not doctors. We weren't going to give you a dosage because that's wrong. And it's even wrong with everybody's medicine. Anybody who thinks otherwise really doesn't know anything about health. There's no dose that I could tell you to take and expect it to work for you. It might be a dose that would work for me, but nobody knows anything about you except you. And well, that was the first part of it, but then all of a sudden it started to be, they'd come back and they'd start sharing their story, and we would work with them hand in hand over and over, and we would help them to get better. And once in a while they wouldn't, and I can remember a few times, like we had a food bank going on, and a lot of times we would have clients that they didn't have any money, and they would always try to look for the hookup stuff, and I would say, well, you know what, if you need the free stuff, I'm glad to give you free stuff, but I want to make sure you take a bag of food with you too. Because if you're in a situation where you need cannabis and you don't have money to pay for it, I'll bet you don't have enough food in your cupboard either. And people would donate enough food that we always had a decent little pantry going. But once in a while, a client would pass away, and they would literally empty out their cupboards and bring the whole thing to us. And I can remember what a touching times those were. And then another development happened. And we had a client that came to me, and he said, this is when the opiate epidemic was really at its worst. Oxycontin and all these drugs were rampant, and everybody, the pain doctor mills and all that stuff was at its peak, right? And so we'd have these older clients come, and I can remember dozens of them. It wasn't just a couple. But the first one that came through, he was this older guy. I don't remember his name. I don't remember a lot about him, but I just remember he said, I had a back surgery. I was in an accident, and he was probably maybe in his 50s. I was maybe 40, 45. I don't think I was 50 yet. I was probably about 40, 45. And he said, I got in an accident, no fault of my own. I hurt my back. I get an operation, and they put me on these pain meds. And as I'm trying to recover, I realized that I'd get to the end of my prescription before the time given to. So they give me a month's worth of medicine, and I'd run out 3 days before the month was out. And then I'd have to go through withdrawals because the doctor wouldn't refill. And so, is there anything you can do to help me? And I said, well, maybe try some of this concentrate and really get yourself good and loaded, and it'll help you to, not think about the withdrawals. And it just made sense to me. And sure as shit, this guy comes back month after month, and he's getting more and more edibles and starting to get concentrates as we had them available. And he says, after a while, he says, you know what, Joe, I really want to thank you because I'm now officially weaned off of this oxycodone or whatever it was. He says the first month I got through, like you said, 3 days of withdrawals, but your edibles helped me. And then I kept taking the edibles, and what I found was that I needed less of the pain meds, where before that I was using more and more, like it was working less and less. But when I combined it with the hash or the edibles you gave me, I needed less of it. And what I found is over time, I was starting to have some left over instead of running out early. And month after month, I would wean myself off further and further. And today, I want to share with you that I'm no longer renewing my prescription. I was so happy. I can remember celebrating with this guy going, imagine losing the grip of an opiate and being able to be all high while you're doing it. And that was when really my understanding of this plant as a medicine began to really open up. But at the same time, that was the first time I got arrested. I got pulled over. We were still a young dispensary, and we didn't even have all of our security measures in place. And I got pulled over carrying all of the contents of the dispensary in my truck and charged with crimes. First time I'd ever been locked up, charged with any crime in my life. I mean, I never even had a speeding ticket. If there was, I was busy growing pot and doing things like that, but no actual crime, nothing that ever hurt anybody. I never stole anything or anything like that. And so now all of a sudden I find myself being accused of being a criminal, being called a liar, being called just a drug dealer. And that's where I'm going to cut this episode off. But really, this is the beginning of my true love affair with cannabis as medicine, because I began to understand some of the things it could do. And that was truly only the beginning. And the next episode's going to be a pretty pointed one. And then there will be a final one that is really kind of a heartbreak. But here we go. I thank everybody for supporting this show. And if you think it's an important show, consider subscribing and having access to all the extra episodes, or let somebody know about it. This is a community we're building, and a lot of people are benefiting. If you've ever wanted to be a part of a community, hit me up. I have a great one that we're building. All right. Thank you. We'll talk to you next time. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.